Good evening and welcome to WishwaTalks. My name is Srivani. Thank you, each one of you. You who have attended a WishwaTalks before, a very warm welcome to you. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about us. WishwaTalks is an initiative by Wishwa. It's an online platform for everyday change makers and social champions. It's a crowdfunding and a crowdsourcing platform that is aimed at helping anyone find the support that they need in their efforts to solve problems for themselves or for others, and in the process, make our world a very beautiful place. WishwaTalks are a series of weekly webinars hosted every Saturday that are focused on gaining an in-depth knowledge from the experts on a wide range of topics that are pertinent to our current context. Today's WishwaTalks is brought to you for over a decade. Madhusudhanan Kalaichelvan, a graduate of architecture with a gold medal in postgraduate studies, has been an academic for over a decade. His efforts have earned him the prestigious Vedavalli Memorial Award for outstanding services by a young achiever in the field of South Indian heritage. He was also recently awarded the title Ilakkiya Chammal, recognizing his mastery of Tamil literature. He's currently pursuing his doctoral research on temple town planning and also serves on the government-instituted panel. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that our speaker will be taking questions from you after his main talk. So please raise a hand or type your questions in the chat box. Now, if I may invite our speaker to please start today's WishwaTalks. Unmute yourself.
விண்ணாளும் தேவர்க்கும் மேலாய வேதியனை மண்ணாளும் மன்னவர்க்கும் மாண்பாகி நின்றானை தன்னார் தமிழளிக்கும் தன்பாண்டி நாட்டானை பெண்ணாளும் பாகனை பேணு பெருந்துறையில் கண்ணார் கடல் காட்டி நாகேனை ஆட்கொண்ட அண்ணாமலையானை ஆடுதுங்கானம்மானாய் சித்தம் தெளிவீர்கள் அத்தன் ஆரூரை பத்தி மலர்தூவ முத்தியாகுமே. Very good evening to you all. Namaskaram and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Audience from different platforms, bring them all together and proving a very brilliant point to the society about growing together. Thanks to WishwaTalks and people who have been engaged in putting this talk together. Very delighted to be presenting a little knowledge that I have on the Pallavas, a dynasty arguably the oldest to construct temples, that which is of permanent materials, who've ruled over the southern part of India for almost half a millennium, have been pretty active when it comes to temple building activities. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that these seminars that I've been doing are available on my website. You can see it on the title slide and you can take a look at it. Okay, any history of South India generally starts with what is called as the Sangam period. It turns out to be a corpus of beautiful poems which speaks about the society, history, culture, and more. Technically, any documented history, that's like the first chunk of documented history of South India. And it is very interesting to note that there is no single reference to the dynasty of Pallavas in the Sangam literature. So quite conveniently, we generally position them after what is popularly referred to as the Sangam period. There are several versions to when actually the Sangam happened, predominantly 3rd century of the Common Era, till the 3rd or the 4th century before Common Era. That's roughly 600 to 700 years is arguably widely accepted to be the time when the Sangam poems were authored. Much later, they were also compiled and brought out as anthologies. So the Pallavas should have been active either during the last phase, or probably that was their time when they started building a small dynasty. It is also interesting to note that the early days of the Pallavas, evidences, epigraphic evidences, iconographic evidences of the earliest phase of the Pallavas are mostly from the southern part of today's Andhra Pradesh. So the Pallavas, the unified Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, I mean, without the borders as we see it today, that region is where the Pallavas have been active. That's like the south of Andhra and the northern part of today's Tamil Nadu. This is in ancient literature referred to as Tondai Mandalam. A region technically. So this part is called as the Tondai Mandalam, and it has always been identified as a seat of scholars. With the east coast running across the Pallava dynasty ruled area, the Pallavas have been quite active in their trades with other country, and they had Mallai or Mahabalipuram, as it's called today, as a very active port town, which was visited by travelers from far and wide. So in today's context, major parts of north of Tamil Nadu, parts of Andhra Pradesh, and even parts of Telangana was where the Pallava rule actually happened. The earliest record is from the copper plates of the 3rd century from this place called Maidovolu in Andhra, and that is where the first reference to the Pallava rule comes into picture. The Pallavas have been active from around the 3rd, 4th century till the 9th century. That's roughly 500 years. And it is at that point of time that popular activity, patronized by and large by the kings, became popular here in South India. Please note that does not mean that there were no temples that existed before the Pallava times, because we have enough references to different deities to whom temples of different sizes and shapes were built with different materials, and festivals being conducted there, everyday rituals happening there, processions happening, and more, much before the Pallavas became active. The Pallavas made a difference in the temple construction. They tried their hands on materials that were permanent. Stone, for that matter, is the primary material that was the Pallavas engaged. Till then, stone was used as more like a secondary material in temple construction activities, while they preferred materials like timber, iron, and plaster for constructing temples. These materials are quite temporary and they're not going to win over the test of time. So the Pallavas are arguably the first ones to try their hands on stone construction here in South India. A brief introduction to the Pallavas. They are in fact called as the Tondayar Kon, or the kings of the Tondai Mandalam. And according to traditional history, the first Pallava king was gifted to the clan on the Andhra Pradesh Tamil Nadu coast, that which has lost their king. A certain community of Nagas who existed there had lost their king and without an issue, and so the lineage had to come to a standstill. Without a king to rule them, the people were worried, and their prayers, again according to traditional history, was answered by the Almighty when they saw a little kid being on the east coast, the waves of the eastern ocean, and the community people discovered this little kid, identified him as a gift by the ocean, and because the little kid was crowned with a creeper of Tondakai, the king was called as Tondaiman, and the region was called as Tondai Mandalam. So that's how you have the name Tondayar Kon coming in. Most of these traditional dynasties generally have these kind of origins, traditional records about their origin. So the Pallavas have this story, and they identify themselves to belong to the Bharadwaja Gotram. And in their copper plates and in sculptural representation, they represent their lineage to be originating from none but Mahavishnu himself. To Mahavishnu, Brahma was born. Angirasa was Brahma's son, who was the father of Brihaspati, to whom Bharadwaja was born. Bharadwaja, of course, was Drona's father. And Ashwatthama's son was called as a, and it said that it was this little kid that was washed ashore when the people there had no king to rule them. And hence they groomed the little kid to become a warrior and called him their king. And this story, the first reference to this story again comes from Simhavarma's Amaravati copper plates. Now you can see Mailovodu and Amaravati, all of these are from Andhra Pradesh region. So the earliest copper plate references of the Pallavas have so far been discovered in Andhra. And so the copper plate also speaks about a celestial woman called Madhani, who along with Ashwatthama gave birth to a kid. And because she had to go back to the Devaloka, and the kid was born out of a temporary relationship, was left afloat on the oceans. And it is said that it was this kid that was born to Ashwatthama, which was washed ashore, and he became the first Pallava. Story involves the seashores and the little kid being washed. Much later, an extended lineage of the kings have also been spoken about in the Velurpalayam copper plates of Nandvarma. Velurpalayam is also very close to Tirthani, another popular temple town in the border of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh again. So most of the Pallava associated aspects happen in the south of Andhra and the northern parts of Tamil Nadu. And so now we quickly shifting over, that's a very brief intro to the history of the Pallavas. The time is, the session for today is on their temple building activities. So I just wanted you to be informed that temples of various different sizes and shapes dedicated to different gods, built out of temporary materials, have existed much before even the Pallavas came into picture. Just that we've lost those temples because they were built out of temporary materials. The Pallavas were the ones this test and come up with a solution when they chose upon stone. With stone, they worked out some wonders. Quite rightfully, the Pallava creations are called as poetry in stone. The Pallavas managed to burrow in rock boulders or hillocks or faces of such mountains and managed to build man-made caves and accommodate shrines there. Or in some cases, they managed to skillfully chop off a complete boulder, shape it up, and make it look like a shrine by itself. And these were called as monolith structures. So it's just one stone which has been carved right from the topmost point to the bottom, to the base. So they're called as monoliths. Structural temples. Of several years later, the Pallavas boulders, cutting them into smaller pieces, carrying them over to different places, putting them one on top of the other, pasting them together to get what are called as structural temples. Apart from these, when they had a choice to carve out flat faces of boulders, they managed to come up with panels depicting various different deities, episodes from Itihasas and Puranas, and in their own way, social images also. So these are the 4 different ways in which stone was used as a solution. Structures that were long lasting, and these were the 4 with stone: caves, monoliths, structural temples, and panels. Starting with the caves, the Pallava caves are, as you can see, sprinkled mostly around the northern parts of Tamil Nadu. That's where you have majority of them. And it's a separate topic by itself to understand them at length, but just be informed that many little towns and villages in northern districts of Tamil Nadu have some finely crafted, beautiful examples of early cave temple architecture. I'm going to get started with this one little village near Thiruvannamalai, a popular pilgrimage town. This village is called as Mandagappattu, and it will look like any of those million villages that you could see in India without much of activities. But it is in this town, this little village, in fact, you have a beautiful which is attested by in constructing with stone. This cave belongs to the times of Mahendravarma I, an illustrious Pallava king. He, along with his son and a couple of them, are to be remembered like Rajaraja and Rajendra of the Chola era. So we have Mahendravarma I. He's tried his hands on many new things. He was the first in many disciplines for that matter. Here, apart from just conceptualizing a temple and carving out some basic figurines and all that, he ensured that there is a record which would share a very important piece of history for eras to come. How is this identified as the first cave temple? Well, we have a record in stone. That's the inscription that you see there in Pallava Grantha. It's a Sanskrit slokam which reads, Edat Anishtakam Vichitra Chittena Nirbhabitham Nripena Brishnu Lakayatanam of Mahendravarma. How tastefully can a king name himself like this? Vichitra Chitta. He says Vichitra Chitta managed to come up with the construction of this cave temple called Lakshitayatanam, dedicated to Brahma, Maheshwara, and Mahavishnu. So the Trinity gods of Hinduism, all three of them. There are actually three individual cells, each of it dedicated to one of the three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But the speciality is that he says it was this cave that was first constructed without brick, timber, metal, or plaster. Anishtakam, Adrimam, Aloham, Achutam. Without Shudai, which is plaster, without Loham, which is metal, without Drimam, which is timber, without Nishtakam, which is brick. These primary materials that were popular then, which is dedicated to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So this Sanskrit slokam here, the two-line inscription, probably poses for a fact that this was the first ever try. But there are also other schools which speaks that there are older versions of cave temples, the southern part of Tamil Nadu, where you have another extremely deeply rooted, historically significant dynasty of Pandyas who were ruling. Not getting into that now, but just be informed that the Pandyas tried their hands on stone much before even the Pallavas. But this inscription only proves a point that they have shown some importance in documentation. The brickless, timberless, metalless, mortarless mansion of Lakshita was caused to be made by King Vichitra Chitta for Brahma, Ishvara, and Vishnu. From there, the legacy of carving all possible phases of rock boulders on phases starts. And you have interesting cave temples, each of it different in its own way. This is in a place called Mamandu, the outskirts of Kanchipuram. And here you have 4 different caves, each of it with different cells and architectural form and shape. The cave temple, one of the cave temple has been active till Rajaraja's time. That's roughly 400 years after Mahendravarma's time. And Rajaraja the Great had given some donations to run the temple there. You can see how a hillock has been tastefully converted into a place of worship. Imagine this with just a barren look. Yeah, I mean, it would be a rock face there and that's it. People would have hardly taken any trouble to visit these places. But Mahendravarma came up with the concept of chiseling down every handheld and managed to create such beautiful spaces and come up with cave temples. So they have carved out, made a small space like a pavilion in the front yard, divided it into 3 parts with 3 different entrances. The columns are also a part of the mother rock, and the columns are unusually thick and they are really broad. They probably had no clue about what should be the strength of the column to hold the complete weight of the hill from top. So they've gone in for something which is actually over broader. And then inside you have the shrine, and you can see a small staircase is there. A couple of steps are there with handrails, and a Shivalingam is installed inside. And you have door guardians on either sides. Again, in the same campus, a shrine, half-filled cave temple with 7 such caves. Several of them are unfinished also. Some of them are finished. Vellore, and this is an elaborate 7-part cave again. There are no deities here. We are not sure as to who are the gods who were to be enshrined there. Again, close to Vellore is another very cute cave in a place called Mahendravadi. The village still echoes with the name of Mahendravarma, and that's just one boulder which looks like which is mushroomed out of nowhere in that otherwise barren piece of land, and you have that cave, the boulder, very tastefully converted by Mahendravarma. And the inscription there calls the place as Mahendrapura, and a lake which is there in close proximity as Mahendra Tataka. The temple has been dedicated to Mahavishnu, and hence it's called as Mahendra Vishnu Graham. I mean, I'm not sure to who else but Mahendra it would have strived to convert a barren boulder into a place of worship like this. And imagine the amount of work and burrow granite boulder with just handheld tools, roughly 1,400 years back, and creating such wonders. That's a simple shrine, and the deity is missing. The icon that you see there is from a later period. You have 2 door guardians here also. We're quickly traveling towards Tiruvannamalai again, to another small village called Singavaram, where a grand cave has been later converted into a structural temple. This is also dedicated to Mahavishnu as Anantasai, and it's on a small hillock. You'll have to climb that hill. It's been built by Narasimhavarma the first. And in the inscriptions, it's referred to as Simha Vishnu Puram. That's the elaborate panel of Mahavishnu as Anantasai. So you have Brahma, and it's a part of the rock boulder. And much later, the front part of the the cave temple, during the later dynasty. So that's Mahavishnu as Anantasai. Just outside the shrine of Vishnu is a very gracefully posing Durga along with her attendants. In the outskirts of Chennai is another small village called Vallam, where you have a very elaborate shrine which has various different deities enshrined. All of this is also part of the cave temple. With commissioned this temple because the style is different. There is also an inscription of a certain Skandasena who was identified as the son of Mahendra's vassal for having contributed to this temple. And the temple is called as Vasanteshwaram. That's the cave temple, where the columns are there. The Pallava cave temples can be identified with the characteristic images of door guardians, the Dwarapalakas, and the huge column as such. That's the inscription which speaks about Vasanta Varman, Skanda Varman. Here again, you see a Durga who is enshrined in the outer mandapa. A very casually seated Ganesha, one of those very early, try of Ganesha images here. This is like the evolution of sub-shrines to a temple. Till now, you've been only seeing caves which had one or more shrines where a deity can be enshrined. But here, you see an extension in the outer wall where you have other deities who are, in today's context, accommodated in sub-shrines of the main temple, also being accommodated. Drive down to Mahabalipuram, which is like the Pallava, that's like the epitome of Pallava contributions to South Indian arts. So there you see half a dozen grand cave structures, all belonging to different times. So this is what is popularly called as the Mahishasuramardini Mandapam. Here you notice how the cave has been articulated into a sub-shrine from inside. So there is a mandapam, which is a part of the original cave built inside. So they've highlighted the central shrine by adding a small mandapam in the forefront. And then you have two other shrines on the side walls have been filled with beautiful panels. And one of the most elaborate cave temple, it's called as Trimurti Mandapam. It's also in Mahabalipuram. And here it's like the shrine for Subramanya, Shiva, Mahavishnu, and Durga. So here you start seeing very clear temple architectural features. Starting from the base, you have the sill and the plinth level, what's called as the Adhisthana. The cave is kind of fine-tuned to accommodate more particular architectural elements. Elements that have been a part of temples that were built with timber. Now they're just replicating all the features from the old temples on stone, in stone. So you actually get to see a fleet of stairs with handrails, very detailed base platform, and a clearly defined doorway with pilasters on either sides. You see a roofing-like structure, and the Vimanam, Kalasam, everything comes out. Yeah, till now, you've not been noticing any of these. They were very rudimentary. So here, you start seeing very typical fine-tuned features of temple architecture appearing. In the same process, another cave where you see these architectural motifs coming up. Some old from the British archives. Thankfully, Mahabalipuram is the next in list of typologies is what we call as monolith. For an easy understanding, let me say the cave temples are different from the monolith because there a huge boulder is caved in. They burrow in, create a cave space, a man-made cave, and then ornament the walls inside. Sometimes manage to divide the cave space into more rooms or more spaces. Imagine the cave is now a part of the mountain or a boulder. Imagine a scenario where the complete boulder is chiseled to look like a fully finished shrine. That's what is a monolith. So that's how a cave is different from a monolith. What are we going to be seeing now are monoliths. And what else would be a better choice than the campus popularly called as in Mahabalipuram to enjoy some of the finest monolith structures of the Pallavas. Now that's the photograph of the campus. This is the tallest and the most grand monolith in the Pallava production. This is called as the Dharmaraja Ratha. Because there are 5 caves, the local tradition identify each of the cave with a character from the Panchapandavas. So the largest one is called as Dharmaraja Ratha. So this is a clear evolution from the rudimentary caves where for the first time they've managed to try a circumambulatory path to go around. That's a part of Hindu temple worship, right? We do a pradakshana. So here again, they've managed to come up with a circumambulatory path. The second try is they've managed to create shrines in the first and the second story of the Vimana. The pyramidal grand rooftop that you see there, that actually has small first and the second level. There is no permanent access as such. Probably in those days, they had a timber ladder to climb up and have a darshan of the deity in the first and the second level. As it is popularly known, none of the monuments in Mahabalipuram are complete. They are all incomplete at different levels. So Dharmaraja Ratham is also incomplete. You don't actually see a shrine there. Now, very clear architectural features, provision for rainwater to come out, all that had come. So you see how, the lowest level, you see gurglers, what look like monkeys with their mouths wide open. That is going to be the rainwater drainage for the first and the second story. So a typical usage and solutions for practical issues in construction, all of it has been brought in. That's an architect's section of the rock. So a complete boulder has been carved or chiseled into a prism-like shape, and they've managed to create spaces at the first and the second level too. That's a monolithic temple. So starting from the Adhisthana, You have from the Upapitam, Madhisthana, Pranala, and the Padavargam. These are all technical terms for different parts of a temple. And up till the Kalasha on the top, that's the pinnacle, right? And the dome structure that you see there, that's called the Vimana, the Shikara of the Vimana. So all of these elements, very detailed fashion. That's a simple monolith structure for dedicated to Durga. So because it's Durga enshrined inside, you have women who safeguard her doors. And you can see this is in a different shape. It's in the shape of a typical traditional hut, four-faced Vimana, and the other features are all there. You have a platform, you have a staircase, you have handrails, you have the pilasters, and the circumambulatory path is there as an independent entity. As you circumambulate, in the exterior wall, you also notice small niches where you have the deities of the Prakara. That's Durga enshrined inside the temple. Just next to Durga's Ratha, Draupadi Ratha is a Ratham which shares the same platform and hence called as Arjuna Ratha. This temple was probably dedicated to Subramanya. How do we guess that? The dome Shikara on top is 6 space. And the Shilpa text suggests a dome-like structure on top. That's a grand Ratham. It's really huge and hence called as Bhima Ratham. It looks very heavy also. And this has all clues to tell us that the shrine was built for Mahavishnu in his Anantasayi pose. If the deity has got to be reclining, you need to have a rectangular in shape. For a Shivalingam, it's always a perfect square. So, but for Mahavishnu, if he's going to be reclining, you need a proper rectangular room. And so this one is a rectangular wagon-like structure. So you can see how each of the monolith is different in shape, size, ornamentation, roof pattern, and more. Today's case, any of the temple in Tamil Nadu, there are roughly 44,000 temples, any of it, the template form of it will be classified under one of these 5 temples. And then you have a very exclusive apsidal shaped shrine. The plan is there, right hand side. It's not a rectangle or a square. It's a little elongated in one direction. And the rear part of it is in the shape of a semicircle, an apsidal shaped shrine. And the text suggests that this can be used for a shrine for Ganesha. So it's either Shivalingam or Ganesha, you can enshrine here. So this is either called as the Sahadeva because it's the smallest of all. You can see how some of the features from even Buddhist architecture, like in Amravati, here in stone. So timber have been mimicked here in stone. To the last phase where they started constructing structural temples. So far we've seen 2 types, caves and monoliths. The last is where they managed to build structural temples. A structural temple is when you quarry a hill or a boulder, get smaller chunks of granite, blocks of it, then you chisel them into defined pieces of stone, and on them you can take it to any. The location of the temple was restricted to where the boulder was actually planted, right? So in the case of a structural temple, you can quarry the stones, take them anywhere you want. You have the elephants at your disposal, carry them wherever you want and construct temples. So the last in the evolution process are the structural temples, where they brought in stone blocks, put them one on top of the other, pasted them with a very thin coat of finely prepared glue with lime. That's a plastering element. And apart from that, some very beautiful calculations of structural structural temples, Mukunda Nayanar temple, Vadakaneshwara temple, and the most popular of all, the Shore temple. Vadakaneshwara temple is, I would, a high point, quite literally a high point in the tendency. They chose the tallest point in the Mahabalipuram landscape to come up with a structure which had a flat roof on which a lighthouse actually stood. If you notice here, the British Archive photos depict how that's like the tallest point, and you have a lighthouse which got the Britishers. So they had to build a new one in the hill just next to it. But here, a tall structure stood on which a lamp was lit every day to guide the ships that were sailing ashore of, across the Bay of Bengal near Mahabalipuram. So that's one of the earliest structural temples built. So here you can see how a flat base has been prepared. Stone boulders of various different sizes and shapes have been carved out, and they've been put on one on top of the other. So that requires a lot of planning, in fact, because each of the side would have a clearly drafted architectural elevation. The architect would want a particular shape in a particular place. Yeah, the pilaster at some point, a coshtam at some point, a niche, or the architect would have chosen, the sacred scripts suggest that you enshrine different devatas in different directions. So, its space for them has got to be made. So the stone which is going to sit there should be convenient enough to carve out the deity. So considering all of this, a very detailed blueprint should have been drafted, and the size of the stones should have also been cut in a way to accommodate the design as such. That's too much of a job, in fact, and they made it at ease. And the Shore temple, the ever romantic and the most photographed monument in Mahabalipuram, in fact, or probably even in the whole of Tamil Nadu, I'm not sure. And it looks gorgeous. Yes, that's a word. In whichever part of the day you go there, or in the night times, or a rainy day, a bright lit summer, or any time in the year, this looks just photogenic. And it's right on the seashore. And so when you stand in front of it, all you hear are either the calm or the rough tides of the sea. And there you have temples dedicated to Shiva, with a small temple in between these two dedicated to Mahavishnu. You can see that in the section, the taller of the two temples is facing the sea. So that's the eastern direction of the rising sun. And the shorter one faces direction of that is setting. And just in between both of these, you have a sandwich space, a very crisp space where Mahavishnu is enshrined. And here, for the first time, you see, circumambulatory path, a very elaborate Vimanam is the superstructure, of course, and the kalasha on top of it, the shikara, which is the hemispherical dome, which is put on the top of the Vimanam, and the sanctum sanctorum is of proper proportions. Yeah, the visual aesthetics has been achieved. There is a proper pradakshina or a circumambulatory path, and all other architectural features that you see in a fully developed temple are seen there. More excavations are still happening, and in the recent past, in the last couple of years, they've managed to excavate and expose a proper compound wall with a row of Nandis seated around the circumference. And to the north of the temple, they've also identified a very shallow pond. You can see it in this picture, a pond, because water is an integral part of any ritual worship, right? So a small pond has also been built there. And there is no end to the Pallavas' innovation and creativity. So by this time, you can be sure that the Shilpa Shastras have achieved their best. The Agamas, the scriptures which are going to govern temple construction and rituals being performed, temple administration, festivals to be conducted, the spatial planning inside a temple, and all that has been authored in the best way possible. So this is like the pinnacle of the Pallavas' contribution towards architecture. And the fourth are the bas-relief sculptures. The Pallavas, I would say again and again, are probably the most tasteful of the sculptures that South India had seen. And so you have, I mean, with all due respect to other dynasties and the sculptors from different times, the Pallavas were like the trendsetters in most cases. And there you have the largest open to sky panel in the whole of Asia, the very popular Bhagiratha Tapas, where a natural cliff with a cleft in between has been exploited in the best way possible by the Pallava sculptors. And the narrow cleft in between has been used with a slope on top of it for water to flow. When that happens and the water gets collected at the base fountain, at the base pond, the best episode to be depicted here is Ganga Avatarana, which is the descent of Ganga. So you have all the characters that involves Bhagiratha's tapas, a very, very popular episode told in very many different languages with alternate versions also in some cases, which involves a very, very long, dedicated, challenging penance of Bhagiratha to propitiate Shiva and get the Ganges down, and how Shiva came to the rescue of all the three lokas. So you have various different living beings. You have animals, you have mammals, you have the celestials, you have human beings, men, women, birds, all sorts of living beings are there, and the celestials are also a part of it. And to the left of the cleft there, you see Bhagiratha balancing in one leg, and he's in a penance. You have Shiva standing next to him. Bhagiratha's tapas. So in conclusion, this is like smaller than a capsule to talk about the Pallavas' contribution, but this is more like an introduction to help you understand that the temples, the grand temple complexes that you see today, were not built at one point of time. They were never built overnight. The construction, the discipline of construction and the winning over structural constraints, choosing the best possible material, and all that had taken several centuries to perfect. And in this list of, there's no end to people whom we should be thanking for the contributions. But if you're going to make a list of people whose contributions are to be highlighted, the Pallavas certainly take a very prominent position in the list. So, this talk was predominantly to make you understand that all the grand temple complexes that you like Srirangam, Madurai, Rameshwaram, or any of the temple complex for that matter, was never built overnight. And the idea of constructing these temples starts from very, very simple altars, probably from the Indus Valley times, and modified mildly during the Vedic period, elaborated much later. And as the Sangam literature speaks about temples with circumambulatory path, processions, and vimanas, temples for different gods built out of brick, and how the rituals were performed there, music and dance were a part of the ritual, and Vedic chanting was heard, fire sacrifices were made, whatnot. So that's the starting point. By Sangam period is one of the most civilized points in Indian history, and even then they had temples that were probably very temporary in nature. But thanks to the Pandyas and Pallavas and their untiring sculptors, the Sthapatis and the architects there, who have contributed to come up with some of the finest productions of human race, in fact, on a material which is very, very strong, like granite. And that should have taken a lot of trial and error to perfect. Hundreds of millions of attempts, failure attempts, but nothing had put them down. They've only managed to perfect it over every mistake that they have probably committed, and come up with solutions that were structurally very strong, aesthetically well balanced, and visually pleasing, and that turned out to be sacred spots where the gods reside for hundreds of thousands of years. And every time you visit a temple, starting from the Pallavas especially, the very feel that you're standing in this very place where great saints who lived 1,000 years back stood and had a darshan, that would make you really feel elated, and you actually feel humbled, in fact, not elated, but humbled. And you want to fall in front of that image of Paramatma, who's been a witness to all the changing times that which been caused by him. With that, I'd like to conclude the session. As I told you, it's a very crisp introductory session to the great Pallavas. And so just managed to pack as much as information possible with supporting photographs in the time that has been given to me. For more detailed sessions, you can always log into my website and check out on, I mean, there are several series that I've done on Pallavas and others, and my other social media handles are also published there. You can make a note of it and feel free to ping me on my Instagram handle if you have any doubts or any information. If you're traveling also, do let me know, can suggest places that you'd like to visit. And my website has my other recorded series on the Pallavas, Pandyas, Cholas, old dynasties, iconography of different gods of South India, and all that. Thank you and have a good evening. Murthy ellam vaazhi, engal mona guru vaazhi, arul vaarthai endrum vaazhi, anbar vaazhi paraparame. Ellam Sri Tyagaraja Kripai, Sri Tyagaraja Maharaja Jayate. Arura Tyagesha. Thank you.
I would now like to request you to take a 30 seconds survey to answer a poll for us. The purpose of the poll is to serve you better so we can better curate the topics that we bring to you. While you take the survey, I would like to say a little bit about WishwaTalks. WishwaTalks is a space to expand the horizons of your mind. Each webinar, we call experts from different domains to discuss and examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we all walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding about the topic at hand. Thank you so much, Madhusudhanan Kalaichelvan. I have visited Mahabalipuram probably since I was 4 years old, but seeing it through your eyes, I know we had just a glimpse of it. I'm going to certainly look at your website, and I'm sure each one of the participants would love to go through it. You made me understand what cave temples were, what monolith temples were, what structural temples were. And I've lived all my life in India. In India, most of us visit temples, but we hardly know anything about our temples. For you to have spent your life working on this field too, and for people like us who will learn from you, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you, madam. It was very nice talking to a very wide range of audience, in fact, from various different backgrounds, and to talk about something that I really love is when I should be thankful to you.
You're actually serving our country and our culture and our identity.
All praise to my acharyas. Thank you.
I would also like to thank each of our participants for being here. And I would like to thank Vishwa team for making this a very seamless event. While we are at it, I would like to thank Biological Events that our first fundraiser with Roshni Trust is now complete. I would also like to share a little bit about our fundraisers at Parampara Foundation. Parampara Dance League, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a very severe impact on all our artists across art forms, but none have been more impacted than our own performance artists. With distancing norms, performance art and its artists have been left with no means to livelihood due to a lack of platform or events where they can perform. Parampara Dance League is created to bridge that gap left by the new norm in a post-pandemic India. It endeavors to provide a near real lifetime stage for artists to showcase their talents. Our request is that either you or friends or family or CSR organizations to support Parampara in supporting the performance artists. They're coming out with a little competition where, the prize that we can give to these artists could be funded. and the event can be conducted with ease and grace. Your support for these artists is very required, because when people go for funding our performance artists, there is very little awareness among the corporates or among people. You go for support for an educational thing, people are ready to support. But performance artists is something that is still not the norm. So my special request for Parampara. Then I would also now talk about Bal Vikas Education Society for Disabled Children. Surveys show that nearly 2 out of every 100 children in India suffer from some form of mental disability. Children with such disorders find it extremely difficult to communicate with others and function in society, and as a result, need utmost support and care during their development journey. For 14 years, Bal Vikas Education Society has helped many such children and parents of these children who needed mental growth and encouragement. They're raising funds to help them pay salaries for their incredibly committed, devoted faculty of teachers and counselors. Right now, Vishwa is supporting the fundraising for 3 teachers. Each teacher is being paid 15,000 rupees, and each teacher can cover at least 30 students. So our request is adopt 1 teacher's salary for a year and help Bal Vikas in their endeavor to support. In addition to this, there are other fundraisers in our Vishwa.org. Please feel free to go through the support all the relevant fundraisers. I would also now like to take questions. If anybody is interested, please raise hand. There is one, Mr. Raji Ramchandran. You can ask your question. There is Parul Kawa. Yes, Parul Kawa, could you continue?
Good evening, ma'am. I'm the regular attendee of your webinar, and every time it's a very wonderful, taste and knowledge to gain. I'm very happy to be the part of the webinar series, and every time I feel, oh my God, this I was not knowing it. This I was not knowing, whether it is a poem or something religious, or this kind of such a wonderful lesson we can. Or I just felt that I was in that past history, of Pallavas, how it had begun. In fact, this kind of knowledge, if I would have got during my school time, then I was sure who was the Pallavas, because during our history time, when teachers used to say Pallavas, Cholas, and all, okay, Pallavas, Cholas, all these things, but the sir has taken it from very origin, how the origin was of Pallavas. So that was very exciting. Thank you so much, ma'am, for organizing such a beautiful webinar. And thank you to the Madhu sir, such wonderful, knowledge he has given us in a very, very short time. So much of thing, like he's saying, such a short period, but I felt full of my heart. It's a very good webinar. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Satyavani, your question next.
Thank you very much. That was an awesome talk. I'm just back from a visit, and I did travel to Tamil Nadu and Kanchipuram. And my question is, I'm an artist, and I usually get permission to draw in temples and the sculptures and all that. I don't have much knowledge, just a lot of interest. And one thing I noticed, which no one in the temple were able to answer the question to my satisfaction, because there were breaks in the information given, was that in the temple in Kanchipuram, which is, I think, not Kapaleshwar temple, it is the
Kailashanatha temple.
Yeah. It was amazing to me how I think the caves are the meditation rooms on the side, and the center one is the structural, the last one you said, where the quarry, structural temples. And what was interesting for me was basically the the limestone, the timber, and this particular temple has these half broken structures, the sculptures. And that's what I was asking, which came first? Was it because in the way I understood history of India, I thought the stone temples came before the mortar and the brick. But from what you're saying, that doesn't seem to be true.
Brick, sun-dried or kiln-burnt bricks are like one of the most earliest materials perfected by man. Be it the Egyptian civilization or our own Indus Valley, it's like brick construction that you see predominantly. So that's where they started. Later, the Pallavas shifted over to completely stone-built structures like the Shore Temple in Mahabalipuram, or in some cases, a combination of all of these. In places within the temple campus where probably to be exposed to rain or other deteriorating agents, they managed to use brick and lime plaster still there. And plaster was predominantly used to fine-tune the sculptures, which were like relief images. Now in Kailashanatha temple, which you just pointed out, you would have seen the walls are just filled with bas-relief sculptures of various episodes from the Puranas or different forms of Shiva. And that would have, of course, been done with sandstone. And sandstone has this quality to deteriorate faster than granite. And if the imagery is, the imagery would look distorted with weathering. And so to fulfill it and keep it intact, they used plaster. And that's like just giving a coat of plaster because plaster is easy to work. It's like clay. So you apply on the.
So was that done by, the Pallavas, or was it done later?
It was by the Pallavas. It was by the Pallavas. See, the series that I told you had so many areas where they overlapped also. So you do see lime plaster being used in structural temples, or lime plaster should have been the material with which the deities were made in the cave temple also. Okay, so none of the cave temple, most of the cave temples, you don't see the deity as such. All you see is a pedestal on the floor of the sanctum. We think that they had a deity made out of stucco, which over times we've lost. So it's always overlaps, and it's a combination of all these materials also in some places.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I also had another question on the panels. They had a lot of murals that were painted inside the meditative rooms that are actually peeling off. A lot of it is peeled off, but you can still see in certain areas, and the color is very vivid, right? And I believe they were vegetable dyes. So was that mural painting also during the Pallava period, or was it later?
The paintings are from the Pallava period, undoubtedly. In fact, you can see in most of the bas-relief images also, some of them have the stains. Yes. I mean, here and there they have. So we can conveniently assume that the complete temple was painted. All the images that you see there have been painted, because the builder, Rajasimha Pallava, who was proudly calls the temple as Harasya Harahasa Rupam. Literally translated, that means this is the smile on the face of Shiva. Wow. If at all you want to imagine how grand or gentle or cosmic the smile of Shiva would be, it would be like the Kailashanatha temple. And he goes on to say Atimanam, Ati Adbudam. So there is no equal to it, and there cannot be anything better than this. And the best part is you have the Chalukya kings, they were like the arch enemies of the Pallavas, and the Chalukyas, when they invaded Kanchipuram, while every other structure was burnt and brought down with the enmity that they had stored for generations, the king himself, when he stood in front of Kailashanatha, said, "No, you're not going to touch this. Let this remain." No point of time in the history of mankind, somebody can again build a structure like this. Let me not take the curse of having brought this temple down. Let this stay there forever. So this is also recorded in history. So, that's like, in fact, the Kailashanatha temple is much better than the big temple of Tanjavur to me personally. That's how special, I mean, you use any vertical, sculptures, planning, painting, architecture, material usage, any vertical to evaluate it stands apart actually.
Yeah, thank you. I had one more question, but I don't want to take too much time. So maybe I'll come back if you have time.
Sure. So one, Mr. Ramkrishnan Rajaram, your question, please.
Thanks for the wonderful organization and a fantastic presentation. I think, share your depth of knowledge with the group like this. It's wonderful. I had a very small doubt the continuation of the previous question. Did they use bricks and plaster even before they found out the ways of sculpting stones and all that?
Yeah, they've used bricks and plaster much before stone being used.
So, any approximate time frame where bricks and plasters were used in construction?
We have references from the Sangam literature,
Yeah.
and we see several bricks from Sangam, pre-Sangam cave structures, where again, bricks have been used. And in fact, in some cases, the Pallava bricks have also been discovered. So yeah, it's certainly more than 2000 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So we have one question from Satyavani. How do you Durga? The sculptures are so different to how she is represented now.
Durga as a very unique iconographic detail. In fact, today, we moved away far from all these fine details. To us, Kali, Parvati, Uma, Durga, everybody is all the same. And, in our pursuit to learn fast or whatever the reasons are, we've forgotten the finer aspects. Durga is that form of Shakti who is a virgin, a goddess who's virgin. She's a young and dazzling young woman. She is bright and she has broad shoulders, very slender arms and slim hip. And she stands with 4 arms holding the Shankha and Chakra. And in the lower 2 hands, there are different weapons that she can carry. But one characteristic feature of Durga is that she would be standing always on a beheaded buffalo. So that's where it comes from. Anthropologists believe that Durga worship comes from the prehistoric period where you had slaughtering of buffaloes and oxes in some cases. Dacoits usually would steal away the cattle and livestock from one settlement to another. And so Durga is identified as that goddess, the protecting goddess. And so once in a while, an animal is sacrificed to her. So she ensures that the other livestock, they live a hale and healthy life and they are protected. So from there, the tradition continues. And much later, she's called as Durga as such, which means the protector of the fort. Durgam is a fort. So Durga is always enshrined north facing, because in most cases in South India, the invasions were from the north. So she's always installed facing the north, and quite rightfully, she's called as as Durga, the one who protects forts.
Next question from Ms. Urfi Prasad. Is the reason for the incompletion of the temples known?
Okay, that's an important question. There are several theories put forward. We don't have enough proof to zero down upon one. Very prominent and arguably what seems like to make sense is an invasion from the Chalukyas, especially in Mahabalipuram group of monuments when they were being constructed. An invasion from the Chalukyas, probably immediately after Mahendravarma's time, had caused stopping of the activities, because we read from history epigraphic evidences about how the sculptors were taken from here to Vatapi, which is today's Badami, and so there are in fact sculptural similarities between the monuments that you see here and there, material usage and other things. There are other reasons like a probable pandemic or a shift of power or withdrawal of patronage, which doesn't really have any proof to support, evidences to support in fact.
Next question is from Malvika Iyer. I understand that a lot of topics would be beyond a talk. Could you suggest any books where one could get a better understanding of these, especially the terms that you showed in a lot of places? Is it Kotravai?
Kotravai, yes, that's the name used. The Sangam literature identify her as Kotravai. Yes, this is an extension of Kotravai worship, and the iconography is also pretty similar to how she is described in the literature. For books suggestion, to begin with, I would suggest Champalakshmi, Dr. Champalakshmi's books on temples. And if you're looking at particular books on Pallava period, undoubtedly the late Dr. C. Meenakshi's books. They are available at the Archaeological Survey of India office. So you can certainly look out for them. That's the first and the best ever doctoral thesis done by the first woman graduate of Madras University, Dr. C. Meenakshi. So that's the best book I would suggest for Pallava architecture.
One question from Mr. Ratnesh Mathur. Please share list titles of Sangam literature and non-Sangam we can clearly identify in the Pallava architecture.
Pallava architecture is not elaborately discussed in Sangam literature. In fact, I remember starting my presentation telling that there is no reference to the Pallava kings in the Sangam period. That's why we generally position the Pallavas as belonging to the post-Sangam times. But there are, out of the 18 anthologies in Sangam literature, I cannot remember which is the one which does not refer to a temple. Almost all of them will have somewhere, some point, a reference to a temple, because it's like compilation of different poems, right? So you definitely have temples, and festivals also are sung about. Temples to Shiva, Mahavishnu, Indra. So the different deities also find a mention. As for Sanskrit work, you have Pallava works as such authored by Pallava kings in Sanskrit, which, for example, one that I can immediately think about is Mattavilasa Prahashanam, authored by Mahendra Varma I. A very good English translation of it is available online that describes the happening city of Kanchipuram in the times of Mahendra Varma. So that's like a photo documentation of Kanchipuram by the king himself in his times. So that's one Sanskrit work I can think about that has references to the architecture as such of Kanchipuram and the temples there.
There's one question from Ms. Meenakshi Khanna. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Okay, yeah. Hello. Hello, thank you very much. I think, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. And even while I was looking at your pictures in the slides, it reminded me very much of Badami and a college trip that I had taken to Aihole, Badami, and Patadakal in order to explain to the students the evolution of temple. Now, my question is that it seems as if the Pallavas had really, set up a template on which perhaps the later rulers were working. And as far as Mahishasura-Mardini is concerned, I remember distinctly, her depiction at Aihole was much more elaborate than what we see in the slides that you have shown. So do you think that, it is really the Pallav template, which was later elaborated upon and maybe in the first stage even emulated, and then, further elaborations were needed as far as the other regions are concerned? Thank you.
I don't remember showing any picture of Mahishasura-Mardini as such in my presentation. I just showed you the cave which is named after her, because there is a very grand panel of Mahishasura-Mardini. But kindly pardon me, I didn't actually show the photograph of the Mahishasura-Mardini panel. It's one of those very finely detailed as such that has the depiction of Mahishasura-Mardini. The iconography is pretty similar to what you see there at Aihole, but it is much more grand and a big sized one too, where the emotions in the face of Mahisha, the pristine look of Devi, the confidence in the team that was along with Devi, and the lion, the roaring lion, and all of it has been best captured in stone. In fact, Durga and Mahishasura-Mardini are very different and distinct when it comes to iconography and concept. So the Pallavas have tried both of them, and both of them are really done the best way possible by them also.
One question from Mr. Balaji R. Have the Pallavas pioneering in using stone to build temples inspired other civilizations like Cholas to build temples such as the Brihadishvara? Okay, so I think the gentleman knows the answer and is trying to actually remind a point which I probably forgot. The Kailasanatha temple of Kanchipuram believed to have been one of the probable inspirations for Rajaraja the Great to come up with the Brihadishvara temple at Tanjavur. While we don't have very clear epigraphic evidences, it's more like a popular theory put forward, going by the similarity with which the structure has been attempted. Both the Vimanas have some similarity in the structural planning part, though it's much taller. The one at Tanjavur is much taller than Kanchipuram. So that's one example. And Rajaraja has also given donations to the
temple at the Kailashanatha temple at Kanchipuram, and very proudly calls it as Kachipettu Periya Thirukkatrali, or the big stone temple of Kanchipuram. That's a title that Rajaraja gives Kailashanatha.
From one question from Malvika Iyer. What are the main differences in the temple architectures of the four ruling dynasties, Chola, Chera, Pandya, Pallava?
That's a semester of coursework for a semester. In fact, I really don't think I might be able to, give it to you as an answer in a question answer session. There are regional differences. There are time-based differences, and region demands the rituals that are performed. That will also be different. So that way there are several differences. And architecturally speaking, any dynasty will very clearly have its own, very identical design patterns, which varies also. And there are also similarities when it comes to spatial planning, and there are similarities also. I think I don't dare to elaborate more than that in a Q&A session for this question.
One question from Sushma Benegal Bane. Who is Jeshta Devi?
Okay, Jeshta Devi is a forgotten goddess in the Indian tradition, and as the name goes, she is the eldest one. She is the elder sister of Mahalakshmi, and she was also so when Kshetrabdi was churned, she came out a little before Mahalakshmi, and hence she is identified as the elder sister of Mahalakshmi. And but she's generally considered as everything opposite to Lakshmi. In fact, the Vedas describe her as Alakshmi, and so that's like, so she is a symbol of bad omen and bad luck today. And she's very heavy in iconography. She's hefty and an old woman with drooping eyes and overflowing bosoms, and so she is considered to be a sign of bad luck. But however, she was also given her Devata status. She was supposed to be worshipped and propitiated in order to be safe. Yeah, so that way she was worshipped. But much later, okay, that's the image of Jeshta Devi from the Pallava times. Thank you for sharing that. So you can see her as an old woman with very heavy features and seated with two arms, and she has her daughter on either side. So she is also a part of Shiva temple worship. Unfortunately, being a sign of bad luck and poverty and laziness, she lost popularity for being worshipped. And in many cases, the Pallava and Chola period temples where the deity was enshrined, over years, so after several centuries, the deities were uprooted and thrown in water tanks or in in agricultural fields. I mean, outside the temple, even now we see several of these loose sculptures of Jeshta Devi who are being reinstated and worshipped.
A question from Ms. Gargi Advaiti, please.
Yes, thank you for this wonderful talk to the organizers and to Madhusudan. For me, it was like 101 of temple architecture, and I know that I have to attend all his classes now, all his lectures, all his workshops, and books, maybe read all that. My question, which probably seems very basic, and because it is my first introduction, is that, you showed, Madhu, you showed one template, sort of a diagram that architect's vision of the structural temple. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much details into it. Otherwise, you cannot build a beautiful layered structure with all those images and all that. So my question is, are there documentation of such an image that they had drawn earlier? That, I mean, you guys have seen it as architects? Documentation of an image that they had first made, or a template they made, over which they can finally, does that exist?
A very brilliant question. In fact, several people ask me this. So far, we have not able to discover any blueprint as such that was drafted initially to come up with a design. But in one or two cases, I have personally seen a particular architectural ornamentation element alone painted to scale in the interiors of a gopuram. During a conservation project for a gopuram, when we climbed up inside the gopuram, where you have the hollow spaces, there in red ochre, they've managed to paint some of the individual ornamentation elements to scale actually, and they also had dimension lines running all around them. So probably that's one version of, after the core was constructed, the ornamentation elements alone were drafted there for reference and left. Measurement scales identified, but a detailed plan or a blueprint, no, unfortunately, we've not been able to discover any of it so far.
Thank you, Madhu. And I have another question. The temples, the initial ones, the caves or the monoliths, and then later the structural temples, were they really active temples, used as temples? Because nowadays when temples are used, they end up looking very, drained. I mean, with all that usage in oil and all that kind of pujas that happen. So in those days, were they really used, or were they just trial and error for their design plan?
The finished temples from the Pallava period, some of them have inscriptions from the later Cholas who identify it as an active temple and have donated for the rituals and lighting of lamp and food offerings. So we can safely assume that they have been pretty active till the Chola, and sometimes even after that. Kailasanatha temple, for that matter, has inscriptions from the Vijayanagara period also. So they've been active too. Some of the obviously wouldn't have been active. So that's more like trying. In fact, the Five Rathas campus, where I showed you a handful of those monoliths, is widely believed to be more like a lab space where they tried their hands on perfecting the proportions and to have one place where all the specimens were kind of exhibited.
Thank you.
Thank you, and very nice to meet you after so long.
You too. So proud of you, Madhu.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay.
With this, I would like. Okay. Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yes. Unmute yourself. Yeah. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. I really appreciate you taking this. The question I had was again about the Kailashnath temple, because I spent like a whole day there studying it. And the question is, the shrine inside, the 16-faced, Shivalingam inside, is supposed to be a representation of the planet Buddha, right? So that was very confusing for me to think about that the temple is made for planet Buddha, but with the Shiva, face. And also the way they have the entry, when you have the main sanctum sanctorum, you can actually circumambulate inside that particular, inside the inner shrine. And they say it is like the birth and death of a womb. So was that created by the priests because they are charging money over there, or was it really there? Because it's unusual as how you climb from underneath and you have to crawl out from that tiny space, which was exceptional and really scary if you really think about it, with someone with respiratory problems,
I mean, yeah, for claustrophobic people and
yeah,
people who are ailing it, it's something that I would advise, in fact. Yeah, so coming to the first part of the question about the planetary references in temples, straightly I can tell you they are all very recent stories, because of late, any temple needs an association with a planet to attract more crowd, because people fear planets than loving God. So that's one reason why people are behind ways to propitiate planets, and so that's becoming a trend. So identifying any temple with a planet and calling that as a safe resort for you to come and pray if your planets aren't good. So that's at your own belief. I leave it to you. That hasn't got anything to do with the scriptures or no inscriptions or agamas identify a temple like that. In fact, a 16-stripped Shivalingam is a tradition which has been identified in the agamas. They are called as Dara Lingam. So each of the Dara has a count. Sometimes you can have 8 and 4 or 16, or that's there. So that's a different league altogether. As far as the circumambulatory path, I mean, it's I'm not sure if the birth and the death idea was there initially, because that's not circumambulatory path. That's the first attempt in coming up with a structural temple having a circumambulatory path. So just in case, to ensure some structural stability, they've managed to have stone beams connecting both the walls. If you've noticed, it's like a two-walled system. That path that you're walking into, it's a space sandwiched between two walls, two concentric walls. So just in case, to ensure that it is structurally safe and integral, the structural integrity isn't disturbed, they've managed some stone beams connecting it at a lower level, leaving you without much of an option, but a small threshold to crawl in. Then you walk the rest of the path, and then again you crawl out. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I really appreciate if you can wrap up now, because I have another live at 6:30.
Sorry, it's closed. All the question and answers have been closed. I'd like to thank you once again, Dr. Madhusudhanan. I'd like to thank Parampara Foundation, Ms. Sashi Reddy, and Pramod Reddy for the work you are doing in this field. Thank you so much for this wonderful talk to each of you. With this, we close.